Are we good? All right, it's Elijah's fault, not me. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for being able to be here tonight, and just pray that as we look into your word, help us to understand the book of Proverbs better, but also to understand some of the traits of one who is described as a fool, and God, that we would not be like that, and that we would not have these traits. God, we just thank you that your word is there to help us to grow and to mature so that we may have the blessing, your blessing in our lives. So we ask for understanding in this passage. In Jesus' name, amen. So as we began the book of Proverbs, very interestingly, the key idea of Proverbs is wisdom. And wisdom is actually a word which literally means a safe thinking, or a thinking that rescues. And so really what wisdom does is it helps you to make good decisions so you avoid pitfalls, dangers, hardships, turbulence, sorrow, destruction in life. And so wisdom is really a part of our series for this year, So Great a Salvation, the idea of rescue. And so as we looked at wisdom, we gave wisdom a definition. Does anybody remember the definition of wisdom? Okay, application of knowledge, that's part of it. Very good. It's the ability to apply the knowledge of God to the affairs of life. And really that's what wisdom is. It's not just any type of wisdom. It's actually the knowledge of God. And we said when it comes to wisdom, what is the starting point for becoming wise? The fear of God, or the fear of the Lord. And I like to explain the fear of the Lord as who's the boss, or who's number one. And so really wisdom is about putting God first in everything. And when God is the most important person, then his knowledge and what he gives us takes precedence in our lives. And so those are two very important concepts. One of the things we've also said about Proverbs is that some of the key phrases or key words is journey, path, way. You see a lot of different words that has the idea of traveling. And so really we can say that life is a journey. And in that journey, Proverbs is there to help us to navigate the journey of life. And the purpose of that is so that we can have abundance of life. We can have joy and peace and have a life that is just marked by the blessing of God. And so tonight we want to talk about the fool. And one of the things we said about wisdom, or a person who's wise, is the same thing that we want to say about a fool. Oftentimes we attach to wisdom, fool, one who's prudent, one who's simple or naive. We like to attach to it, it means they don't have a very high IQ. So we would say, a person who's wise is really, really smart. But a person who's a fool, they're a dummy. No, it has nothing to do with intelligence. So we want to kind of get that out of our mind when we think about each of these different types of individuals. I would submit to you that wisdom, foolishness, prudence, and simplicity is really about one's heart attitude towards God. So remember we said the beginning of wisdom, the starting point is the fear of God. That's very much an attitude and a frame of mind or a way of thinking. And so someone who is wise has a specific type of attitude. Someone who is foolish, they have an attitude as well. So the wise has a good attitude towards God, And a foolish person has what we call a bad attitude towards God. And so we see this actually right from the very beginning in Proverbs in the first instance of a fool. So Proverbs chapter 1 in verse 7. Notice it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." So you can see just in that verse, what we are talking about is an attitude primarily. And so the one who has an attitude where God is first, there's the beginning of knowledge. But what is the attitude of fools towards wisdom and instruction? They despise it. And so you can see the attitude in that verse and then the action is something that really comes afterwards. So a wisdom, foolishness, prudence, simplicity, it's really about heart attitude towards God. It is not about one's intellectual capabilities. What I want to do now is just kind of take a look at 3 specific characteristics of a fool. And so we're going to turn to several different passages in Proverbs. But one of the first characteristic we want to look at of a fool is there's someone who is obstinate. They're stubborn. They dig in their heels. They are strong-willed. So let's look at, first of all, Proverbs chapter 15, verse 5. So Proverbs chapter 15 and in verse 5. And so if you notice, a fool rejects his father's discipline, but he who regards reproof is simple. So we can see here, what does a fool do when his father tries to give him in discipline or tries to give him instruction or training? He rejects it. He's obstinate. He's strong-willed. The next one is chapter 16. So chapter 16, verse 22. It says, "Understanding is a fountain of life to one who has it, but the discipline of fools is folly." To try to train someone who's a fool is considered folly. Why? Because he's obstinate. He's strong-willed against something. And then chapter 17, verse 10. It says, "A rebuke goes deeper into one who has understanding than 100 blows into a fool." So you think about it, the comparison between the two is that someone who has understanding, someone who has a right attitude towards God, that when rebuke comes, what do they immediately do? Accept it, receive it. But for the fool, you can beat him over and over and over again 100 times, and is it ever going to reach his heart? It isn't. Why? Because he's got his heels dug in. Because he's stubborn. He's obstinate. And then the last one is chapter 27, verse 12. So 27:12. So 27:12. 22, I'm sorry, 27:22. "Though you pound a fool in a mortar with a pestle along with crushed grain, yet his foolishness will not depart from him." So back in the day, a pestle and a bowl, or a mortar and pestle, we usually think of it in terms of what pharmacists used to use. So before, they just made all the pills and everything, pharmacists would take certain amounts of the different things, and they put it into a mortar, and then they take the pestle, and they grind it. And after they ground it all together into a fine powder, then you're able to mix it in some things or whatever, and that would be the medicine. And so what he's saying here is you can take a fool, and you could, as if putting him in a mortar, and you can pound him with that pestle, grind, turn, all these things to try to turn it into dust. And yet for a fool, his foolishness will not leave him. So what we see here is this characteristic of stubbornness, of being obstinate, digging in the heels, and being strong-willed. The second characteristic of a fool is that he does not practice self-control. So Proverbs chapter 29. So Proverbs chapter 29 in verse 11. A fool always loses his temper, but a wise man holds it back. So a fool is one who does not practice self-control. Then we'll go backwards to Proverbs chapter 20. So Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 3. Keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. So, a honorable man is one who learns to keep away, to stay away from strife, know how to avoid these sorts of things. They're ones who work towards peace. And so they part of that is exhibiting self-control. But what will a fool do? He'll quarrel. He looks for a fight. He's ready to unleash because he doesn't practice self-control. And then Proverbs chapter 18. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 6 and 7. A fool's lips bring strife, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The one area, and we've seen areas where a fool does not practice self-control. In this case, what you see with a fool, the one thing he does not control is his speech, his mouth. Now, when it comes to the quarreling, that's the same thing as well. But a fool is one who doesn't know to keep quiet or to control his speech. He does not control even his anger. He doesn't control he doesn't want to bring peace. He's one who does not control himself. And as a result, it causes all sorts of problems. So a fool is one who's stubborn, strong-willed, obstinate. A fool is one who does not practice self-control. And then the last one is a fool is one who is arrogant. So Proverbs chapter 14. So Proverbs chapter 14 and in verse 16. A wise man is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is arrogant and careless. So what's interesting is that the fool is one who is so self-absorbed in himself, is that he thinks he possesses the inward fortitude and strength where that nothing can conquer him. He's always strong enough to handle whatever comes along. He doesn't need any help whatsoever. And so he thinks of himself as being invincible. But yet when the situation comes, the problem is he doesn't have that self-control. And and so what happens is with that arrogance, he becomes very careless because I can handle anything. And then he winds up getting himself into a whole heap of trouble and a whole bunch of problems. But his arrogance is what leads to his fall because he thinks of himself as being invincible. And then the last one is chapter 29, verse 9. So chapter 29, verse 9. And in 29, verse 9, it says, when a wise man has a controversy with a foolish man, the foolish man either rages or laughs, and there is no rest. And so I think as you see this arrogance, is that a fool only cares about one person, himself. That's it. He's only concerned with himself. And as the verse says here, when there is this controversy, what does he do? He laughs. Or he gets angry, very, very angry. But either way, there's no peace. And so, the arrogant fool is so inward focused that he does not consider other people around him. Whether a person's trying to help him, it doesn't matter. He is so inward focused and so self-absorbed, he just could care less about the people around him. And he doesn't care if he hurts people. He doesn't care how he treats people. That's just what an arrogant person does. So you can see these are just the three main characteristics of a person who's a fool. Any questions what we looked at this evening, or any comments on it? All